Deep within every human soul lies a power so magnificent, so transformative, that once awakened, it can reshape your entire existence from the ground up. This isn't some mystical force granted only to the chosen few. No, this is the extraordinary gift of self-control, the true kingship that transforms ordinary individuals into masters of their own destiny. Right now, in this very moment, you possess the ability to claim your throne, to reign supreme over your impulses, your fears, your doubts, and to forge a life of purpose, meaning, and unshakable strength. William George Jordan's timeless masterwork illuminates a profound truth that echoes through the ages, that the greatest kingdom any person can ever rule is not one of land or wealth, but the kingdom of the self. Think about it for just a moment. We admire kings and queens for their authority over nations. Yet how many of us have truly claimed authority over our own thoughts, emotions, and actions? The irony is staggering. We seek to conquer the world while we remain conquered by our own weaknesses, enslaved by habits we never chose, driven by impulses we never examined, and controlled by fears we never challenged. The foundation of all meaningful achievement, all lasting happiness, all genuine success in every aspect of human existence rests upon this single principle, the mastery of oneself. Jordan reveals that self-control isn't merely about restraint or denial, it's about liberation. It's about claiming your birthright as a conscious, choosing being who directs life rather than being directed by it. Every great accomplishment in human history, every remarkable transformation, every inspiring story of triumph over adversity has at its core this fundamental quality: the ability to govern oneself with wisdom, patience, and deliberate intention. Consider for a moment the architecture of your daily life. How much of what you do, say, think, and feel is truly chosen versus merely reactive? How often do you find yourself responding automatically to situations, speaking words you later regret, making choices that contradict your deepest values, following patterns that lead you away from your dreams rather than toward them? This isn't a personal failing. It's the human condition, but it doesn't have to be your permanent reality. The kingship of self-control offers you the keys to unlock a completely different way of being, one where you become the conscious architect of your experience rather than a passive victim of circumstance. Jordan emphasizes that true self-control begins with understanding the enormous difference between reacting and responding, between being driven by external forces and being guided by internal wisdom. When we react, we're like leaves blown by the wind, moving wherever the current takes us, powerless and directionless. But when we respond, when we exercise genuine self-control, we become like the mighty oak tree, rooted deeply in our values, bending perhaps in the storm, but never breaking, always maintaining our essential integrity and direction. This shift from reaction to response represents nothing less than the difference between living as a slave and living as a king. The beauty of self-control lies not in its complexity, but in its accessibility. It doesn't require special talents, extraordinary circumstances, or unique advantages. It requires only one thing: the decision to begin, followed by the commitment to continue. Every single day presents you with countless opportunities to exercise this royal prerogative in how you respond to frustration, in how you handle disappointment, in how you manage your appetites, in how you direct your attention, in how you choose your words, in how you invest your time, in how you treat yourself and others. Each of these moments is a throne room where you can either claim your crown or abdicate your power. Jordan illuminates a powerful truth that many miss. Self-control isn't about suppression or denial of your humanity. It's about the full expression of your highest humanity. When you control yourself, you're not diminishing your life, you're expanding it beyond measure. Think of a master musician. Does the discipline to practice scales, to follow the tempo, to honor the composition restrict their musical expression or enable it? Obviously, the discipline creates the freedom for true artistry. Similarly, the discipline of self-control creates the freedom for true living, for authentic joy, for meaningful accomplishment, for deep relationships, for lasting peace. The person who lacks self-control is actually the restricted one. They're imprisoned by every whim, enslaved by every impulse, controlled by every external stimulus, manipulated by every internal urge. They may appear free because they do whatever they feel like doing in the moment, but this isn't freedom, it's chaos, masquerading as liberty. True freedom comes from the ability to choose your response based on wisdom rather than feeling, based on values rather than impulse, based on long-term vision rather than short-term desire. This is the freedom of kings, the freedom that comes from ruling rather than being ruled. Let me share with you a story that perfectly captures this principle. There was once a young man who worked in a factory, doing hard manual labor for modest wages. He watched others around him complain bitterly about their circumstances, drowning their frustrations in drink each evening, wasting their wages on momentary pleasures, speaking harshly to their families when they returned home exhausted. This young man made a different choice. Every evening, no matter how tired he felt, he spent 2 hours reading and studying, improving his mind and expanding his skills. His co-workers mocked him, called him foolish, told him he was wasting his youth. They couldn't understand why he would deny himself the immediate gratification they indulged in. But this young man understood something profound. He understood that every act of self-control was an investment in his future, that every moment of discipline was building the foundation for something greater. He controlled his spending, saving money when others squandered theirs. He controlled his temper, speaking kindly when others spoke harshly. He controlled his appetites, staying sober and focused when others dulled their senses. He controlled his time, using it purposefully when others wasted it carelessly. And slowly, steadily, inevitably, his life began to transform. Within 5 years, his expanded knowledge and demonstrated reliability earned him a supervisor position. Within 10 years, he had started his own business. Within 20 years, he had become a respected leader in his community, financially secure, surrounded by loving family, admired by all who knew him. Meanwhile, his former co-workers who had mocked his discipline remained trapped in the same circumstances, still complaining, still indulging, still controlled by their impulses, still wondering why life had been so unfair to them. The difference wasn't luck, talent, or opportunity. The difference was self-control. One man claimed his kingship, the others remained subjects of their own weaknesses. Jordan teaches us that self-control operates like compound interest in your life. Small investments made consistently over time yield extraordinary returns that seem almost miraculous to those who don't understand the power of accumulation. Every time you exercise self-control, you're not just handling one situation well, you're strengthening the very capacity for self-control itself. You're building psychological muscle, developing neural pathways, establishing patterns of mastery that become easier and more natural with each repetition. The person who controls themselves in small things develops the capacity to control themselves in large things. The person who masters minor temptations builds the strength to overcome major trials. This principle explains why some people seem to possess almost superhuman discipline, while others struggle with the simplest self-restraint. It's not that they were born different, it's that they've been training differently. The disciplined person has been exercising their self-control consistently, building it through daily practice until it becomes their natural mode of operation. The undisciplined person has been weakening their self-control through constant indulgence, making it harder and harder to access that faculty until it atrophies almost completely. But here's the encouraging truth: no matter how weak your self-control may be right now, you can begin strengthening it this very moment, and if you commit to consistent practice, you'll be amazed at how quickly it develops. The starting point for developing self-control lies in understanding what Jordan calls the sovereignty of choice. You must recognize that except in the most extreme circumstances, you always have choice in how you respond to any situation. This sounds simple, but it's revolutionary because most people live as though they have no choice, as though their reactions are inevitable, as though they're helpless victims of circumstance. Someone speaks rudely to them and they believe they must respond with anger. They feel a craving and believe they must satisfy it immediately. They face a challenge and believe they must feel overwhelmed. They experience disappointment and believe they must sink into despair. But none of these responses are inevitable. They're chosen, usually unconsciously and habitually, but chosen nonetheless. And what can be chosen differently. This recognition is the first step toward claiming your kingship, understanding that between every stimulus and your response lies a space, and in that space resides your power to choose. Most people have never consciously recognized this space. They experience stimulus and response as a single unbroken chain, like a knee-jerk reflex. But when you begin to see the space, when you begin to realize that you can pause, reflect, and choose before responding, everything changes. Jordan encourages us to start practicing this awareness in small, low-stakes situations. When you feel mild irritation, pause before reacting and notice that you have a choice in how to respond. When you feel a minor craving, pause before indulging and recognize that you have the power to delay or deny. When you face a small disappointment, pause before slumping into negativity and realize that you can choose your interpretation and your emotional response. These small practices in everyday moments are the training ground for your kingship. They're where you develop the capacity that will serve you when life presents much greater challenges. The cultivation of self-control requires what Jordan describes as the guardian of the threshold, a kind of inner sentry that stands watch over your thoughts, words, and actions, questioning whether they align with your highest values and deepest intentions. This guardian asks simple but powerful questions before you speak. Is this true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Before you act, does this serve my long-term goals or just my immediate impulses? Before you indulge a thought pattern, is this helping me or harming me? Is this moving me toward who I want to become or away from it? Most people have no such guardian. Thoughts flow unchecked through their minds. Words tumble out of their mouths without examination. Actions follow desires without consideration of consequences. They're like a kingdom with no guards at the gates. Anyone and anything can enter and wreak havoc. But the person who develops self-control establishes firm guardianship. Not everything is allowed entry. Not every thought is entertained. Not every word is spoken. Not every impulse is honored. This selectivity isn't restriction, it's curation. It's the conscious creation of a mental and emotional environment that supports your highest flourishing. Jordan emphasizes that genuine self-control must extend to every dimension of your being. Your thoughts, your emotions, your speech, your actions, your habits, your time, your attention, your resources. You cannot claim kingship over some areas while remaining enslaved in others. The kingdom of self must be unified under wise rule. Consider how these dimensions interconnect. Uncontrolled thoughts lead to uncontrolled emotions, which lead to uncontrolled speech, which leads to uncontrolled actions, which lead to uncontrolled consequences. But when you establish control at the source, at the level of thought, everything downstream benefits. The mastery of thought is perhaps the most crucial and most challenging aspect of self-control because thoughts are subtle, rapid, and seemingly involuntary. You can't stop thoughts from arising, but you can absolutely control which thoughts you engage with, which you develop, which you believe, and which you dismiss. Your mind is like a garden. You can't prevent seeds from blowing in on the wind, but you can certainly choose which plants you cultivate and which weeds you pull out. Most people let every thought grow wild. Their mental garden becomes overgrown with worry, resentment, fear, envy, and negativity. But the person who exercises self-control tends their mental garden carefully, nurturing thoughts of gratitude, possibility, kindness, courage, and purpose, while refusing to give energy to toxic mental weeds. This doesn't mean forcing false positivity or denying reality. It means choosing to focus your attention on what's constructive rather than what's destructive, on what you can control rather than what you can't, on opportunities rather than obstacles, on solutions rather than problems. When a negative thought arises, and it will because you're human, you acknowledge it without judgment and then consciously redirect your attention towards something more useful. This practice, repeated thousands of times, gradually rewires your brain, creating new default patterns of thinking that support rather than sabotage your well-being and success. Jordan teaches that emotional self-control doesn't mean suppressing or denying your feelings. It means not being tyrannized by them. Emotions are valuable information systems. They tell you something about your interpretations and your needs, but they're terrible masters. When you let emotions run your life, you're guaranteeing chaos because emotions are reactive, temporary, and often disproportionate to actual circumstances. The person who lacks emotional self-control is on a constant roller coaster, elated one moment and devastated the next. Their stability completely dependent on external circumstances they can't control. But the person who develops emotional self-control learns to observe their emotions with interest without immediately acting on them. They can feel anger without becoming anger, experience fear without being paralyzed by it, notice sadness without drowning in it, recognize desire without being consumed by it. This observational distance creates freedom. You're no longer the puppet of your emotional states. You're the wise king who considers emotional information along with other data before deciding how to respond. This doesn't make you cold or unfeeling, it makes you stable and reliable, both to yourself and others. The control of speech is another crucial dimension of self-mastery that Jordan highlights. Your words have extraordinary power to build or destroy, to heal or harm, to create or corrupt. Yet most people treat speech carelessly, saying whatever comes to mind without considering the impact. They gossip, complain, criticize, exaggerate, lie, manipulate, and wound, often without even recognizing the damage they're causing. Every careless word, every harsh judgment, every unnecessary criticism, every piece of gossip is an abdication of your kingship, a moment where you let your lower impulses rule instead of your higher wisdom. The practice of controlling your speech is transformative. Before speaking, pause and consider. Is what I'm about to say true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Does it improve upon the silence? This simple practice eliminates probably 80% of the problems people create through their words. You stop gossiping because it fails all three tests. You stop complaining unnecessarily because it doesn't improve anything. You stop criticizing harshly because it isn't kind. You stop lying because it isn't true. You stop speaking just to hear yourself talk because it isn't necessary. And in the space created by this newfound verbal discipline, your words gain enormous power because people learn that when you speak, it matters, that your words can be trusted, that what you say has been carefully considered and comes from a place of integrity. Jordan points out that one of the most important areas requiring self-control is the management of your time and attention in an age of unprecedented distraction. Every moment you spend is a moment you'll never get back. Yet most people squander their time as though it were infinite, scrolling mindlessly through social media, watching television shows they don't even enjoy, engaging in activities that add no value to their lives, saying yes to commitments that don't align with their priorities, allowing others to dictate their schedules without consideration of their own goals. This isn't living, this is drifting, and drifting never leads anywhere worth going. The sovereign of their own life exercises ruthless control over their time and attention. They recognize these as their most precious non-renewable resources and guard them accordingly. They establish clear priorities based on their deepest values and most important goals. Then they align their time expenditure with these priorities, saying yes to what matters and no to what doesn't, regardless of social pressure or fear of missing out. They create boundaries around their attention, choosing deliberately what they will focus on, rather than letting every notification, interruption, and distraction pull them in random directions. They understand that attention is like a superpower. Whatever you consistently focus on grows in your life. So they focus on what they want to grow rather than what they want to shrink. Let me share another story that illustrates this principle beautifully. There were two friends who graduated from university together with similar degrees and similar opportunities. Both were talented, both were ambitious, both wanted success. The first friend had poor self-control over his time and attention. He would start each day with good intentions, but quickly get pulled into checking emails, browsing news sites, scrolling through social media, responding to every text message immediately, taking phone calls from people who just wanted to chat, saying yes to every meeting request, watching videos that caught his interest, essentially fragmenting his attention into 1,000 pieces. By the end of each day, he felt busy and exhausted but couldn't point to any meaningful progress toward his goals. The second friend exercised iron self-control over his time and attention. He would start each day by identifying his 3 most important tasks that directly advanced his key goals. He would then protect blocks of uninterrupted time to work on these tasks, putting his phone on silent, closing his email, working in a distraction-free environment, treating this focused time as sacred and non-negotiable. He would batch process less important tasks at designated times rather than letting them interrupt his flow throughout the day. He would carefully evaluate every request for his time, saying no to anything that didn't align with his priorities, even when it was uncomfortable to decline. After 5 years, the difference between these two friends was staggering. The first was still busy, still distracted, still making modest progress, still wondering why success seemed so elusive. The second had accomplished more than most people achieve in 20 years, not because he was smarter or more talented, but because he exercised self-control over his most valuable resources. He had written 2 books, while his friend had written none. He had built a thriving business, while his friend was still working for someone else. He had developed deep expertise in his field. While his friend remained a generalist, he had cultivated meaningful relationships, while his friend had 1,000 shallow connections. The power of controlled attention compounded over time to create entirely different life trajectories. Jordan teaches us that self-control over physical appetites is another essential dimension of kingship. We live in bodies with powerful drives for food, rest, pleasure, and comfort, and these drives are natural and necessary for survival. But in modern society, where survival is relatively assured for most people, these drives often become tyrants, demanding constant indulgence, leading us into habits that undermine our health, energy, and vitality. The person who eats whatever they want, whenever they want, who sleeps as much as they feel like, who avoids any discomfort, who constantly seeks pleasure and ease, is not free. They're enslaved to their most primitive impulses. The person who exercises self-control over their physical appetites makes conscious choices about what they consume, how they move, how they rest, and how they challenge themselves physically. They understand that their body is the vehicle through which they experience and impact the world, and they treat it accordingly. They choose nourishment over mere pleasure. They embrace beneficial discomfort over harmful ease. They honor their body's real needs rather than every fleeting want. This doesn't mean punishing your body or denying all pleasure. It means being the wise steward of your physical well-being rather than the servant of every craving. Consider the profound impact this has across your entire life. When you control your eating, you have more energy, better health, greater confidence, and increased mental clarity. When you control your rest patterns, you're more productive, more present, and more capable. When you embrace physical challenge, you build resilience, discipline, and a sense of capability that extends far beyond the physical realm. When you avoid overindulgence, you maintain the sensitivity to truly enjoy pleasures rather than becoming numb through excess. Every act of physical self-control ripples outward to benefit every other area of your life. Jordan emphasizes that developing self-control requires understanding and working with your limitations rather than pretending they don't exist. You have finite willpower, especially at the beginning of your journey towards self-mastery. Willpower is like a muscle. It gets tired with use and needs recovery, which means you need to be strategic about how you deploy it. Don't try to change everything at once. Don't rely on willpower alone. Don't set yourself up for failure by putting yourself in situations where temptation is overwhelming and your resistance is weak. Instead, use your intelligence to design an environment and lifestyle that makes self-control easier rather than harder. If you're trying to eat healthier, don't keep junk food in your house and rely on willpower to resist it. Just don't buy it in the first place. If you're trying to be more productive, don't work in a place full of distractions and rely on willpower to stay focused. Create a distraction-free workspace. If you're trying to break a bad habit, don't surround yourself with people who encourage that habit and rely on willpower to resist. Find new companions who support your goals. This isn't weakness, this is wisdom. You're using self-control to create conditions that require less self-control, which allows you to build your capacity over time. The development of self-control also requires what Jordan calls the long view, the ability to see beyond immediate circumstances to longer-term consequences. Most failures of self-control happen because people are overly focused on the present moment. The immediate pleasure of indulgence blinds them to the future pain of consequences. The immediate discomfort of discipline blinds them to the future reward of growth. But when you cultivate the long view, when you train yourself to look ahead and consider where your current choices are leading, everything changes. Imagine standing at a fork in the road. One path is smooth, easy, downhill, inviting, but you can see that it leads to a swamp. The other path is rough, challenging, uphill, demanding, but you can see that it leads to a mountain peak with an extraordinary view. Which path do you choose? With the long view, the choice is obvious. You'll accept the temporary difficulty for the lasting reward. But without the long view, you'll take the easy path and end up mired in the swamp, wondering how you got there. Every moment of choosing requires this same long view thinking. Where does this choice lead? Who am I becoming through this decision? Will my future self thank me for this or regret it? Jordan teaches that self-control is ultimately an expression of self-respect. When you control yourself, you're saying, I value myself too much to let my life be run by impulses and circumstances. I respect myself too much to settle for less than my potential. I honor myself too much to live reactively rather than purposefully. This reframe is powerful because it transforms self-control from something that feels like restriction into something that feels like self-care. You're not depriving yourself when you exercise discipline. You're giving yourself the gift of a well-lived life. This connection to self-respect also explains why people who lack self-control often have low self-esteem. It's hard to respect yourself when you constantly betray yourself, when you make promises to yourself that you break, when you know you're capable of more but you settle for less, when you watch yourself repeatedly choosing short-term pleasure over long-term well-being. Every failure of self-control is a small wound to your self-respect, and these wounds accumulate. But every exercise of self-control is a healing balm. Every time you keep a commitment to yourself, every time you honor your values over your impulses, every time you choose the hard right over the easy wrong, you build genuine self-respect that becomes unshakable. The practice of self-control also requires understanding and managing what Jordan describes as the inner dialogue, the constant conversation you have with yourself in your mind. For most people, this dialogue is surprisingly negative, critical, defeatist, and self-sabotaging. They speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to anyone else, calling themselves names, predicting failure, highlighting every flaw, dwelling on every mistake. This internal environment makes self-control extraordinarily difficult because you're constantly undermining your own efforts. But when you take control of your inner dialogue, when you speak to yourself with encouragement, patience, and constructive support, self-control becomes much more natural and sustainable. You become your own best coach rather than your own worst critic. When you slip up, instead of berating yourself and spiraling into shame, you speak to yourself with understanding while firmly redirecting toward your goals. When you face a challenge, instead of telling yourself you can't do it, you remind yourself of past successes and your growing capabilities. When temptation arises, instead of focusing on what you're giving up, you remind yourself of what you're gaining. This supportive inner dialogue is like wind in your sails, making the journey of self-mastery so much easier. Jordan emphasizes the importance of celebrating your progress in developing self-control rather than only focusing on how far you still have to go. Every time you exercise self-control, even in a small way, take a moment to acknowledge it, to feel good about it, to recognize that you've just strengthened your kingship. This positive reinforcement creates a virtuous cycle where self-control becomes associated with good feelings rather than only with sacrifice and difficulty. You begin to enjoy exercising discipline because you know you're building the life you want, because you feel your power growing, because you respect yourself more with each conscious choice. One of the most profound aspects of developing self-control is recognizing that it's not just about you. Your self-mastery ripples outward to affect everyone around you in ways both obvious and subtle. When you control your temper, your family benefits from a more peaceful home. When you control your spending, your children learn financial responsibility. When you control your time, your friends experience your greater presence. When you control your speech, your colleagues work in a more positive environment. When you control your habits, you model possibilities for others who are struggling. You become a beacon of what's possible, living proof that human beings don't have to be slaves to their impulses and circumstances, that we really can be the conscious authors of our own experience. People will notice the changes in you. They'll see your increasing stability, capability, and peace, and some will be inspired to begin their own journey toward self-mastery. In this way, your personal commitment to self-control contributes to the elevation of everyone you touch. You become a force for good simply by refusing to let your lower impulses run your life. Jordan also addresses the inevitable setbacks and failures that occur on the path to self-mastery. You will not develop perfect self-control overnight. You will have moments when you react instead of respond, when impulse overcomes intention, when old patterns reassert themselves. This is completely normal and expected. It's part of the learning process. The key is not to let these setbacks derail your entire journey, not to interpret one failure as evidence that you're incapable of change, not to use a moment of weakness as an excuse to abandon all discipline. Instead, treat setbacks as learning opportunities. When you fail to exercise self-control, get curious about what happened rather than falling into shame or self-criticism. What were the circumstances? What were you thinking and feeling? What triggered the loss of control? What could you do differently next time? This analytical approach helps you identify patterns and develop strategies, making each setback a stepping stone toward greater mastery rather than a reason to give up. Remember that even a king has bad days. What makes them a king is not perfection, but the commitment to rule wisely more often than not, to learn from mistakes, to keep claiming the throne even after being temporarily knocked off it. The ultimate goal of self-control, as Jordan beautifully articulates, is not rigid restriction, but authentic freedom. When self-control becomes second nature, when it's your default mode of operation rather than something you have to constantly fight for, you experience a liberation that people who lack discipline can't even imagine. You're free from the tyranny of impulse, free from the manipulation of external circumstances, free from the slavery of bad habits, free to pursue what truly matters, free to become who you're capable of being, free to live according to your deepest values rather than your shallowest urges. This freedom allows for genuine spontaneity and joy because your spontaneous impulses now arise from a well-ordered soul rather than a chaotic one. When a disciplined person acts spontaneously, it's authentic self-expression. When an undisciplined person acts spontaneously, it's often self-destruction. The goal isn't to become some sort of rigid, joyless automaton. It's to become a fully integrated human being whose thoughts, feelings, words, and actions all align in service of a life well lived. This integration is the crown jewel of self-control, and it's worth every bit of effort required to achieve it. Jordan reminds us that the kingship of self-control is not a destination you arrive at, but a practice you maintain. You never reach a point where you can stop exercising self-control and expect to remain the master of yourself. The throne requires constant occupation. The kingdom requires ongoing wise rule. But here's the beautiful truth. The practice becomes easier and more natural over time. What required tremendous effort at the beginning eventually becomes almost effortless. What felt like sacrifice initially eventually feels like self-care. What seemed like restriction ultimately reveals itself as liberation. Think of it like learning to play a musical instrument. At first, every note requires conscious effort and intense concentration. Your fingers don't want to move the right way. The music sounds terrible, and you wonder if you'll ever be able to play. But if you practice consistently, something magical happens. The movements become automatic. The music begins to flow. And one day you realize you're no longer thinking about the mechanics. You're just playing, expressing yourself through the instrument with joy and ease. Self-control is exactly the same. The consistent practice of conscious choice gradually rewires your brain and rebuilds your habits until self-mastery becomes your natural way of being. As we near the end of this exploration of William George Jordan's profound wisdom, let me remind you of where we began. Deep within every human soul lies a power so magnificent, so transformative, that once awakened, it can reshape your entire existence from the ground up. You now understand what that power is. It's self-control, the kingship that's your birthright, the throne that awaits your claim. Everything we've discussed, the sovereignty of choice, the guardian of the threshold, the mastery of thought and emotion and speech and action, the long view, the inner dialogue, the ripple effects, all of these are facets of the same essential truth. You are not helpless. You are not a victim. You are not doomed to be controlled by circumstances and impulses. You are capable of ruling yourself with wisdom and becoming the person you were meant to be. The question now is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you let it remain merely interesting information, something to nod at and agree with before returning to your old patterns? Or will you let it become transformative truth, something that actually changes how you live, starting right now, this very moment? The choice, as always, is yours, and that choice is itself an exercise of the kingship we've been discussing. You can choose to begin your journey towards self-mastery today, starting small but starting, taking one area of your life where you know you lack control and committing to developing discipline there. Maybe it's your morning routine, maybe it's your evening habits, maybe it's how you respond to a difficult person in your life. Maybe it's what you eat. Maybe it's how you spend your free time. Maybe it's what you allow yourself to think about. It doesn't matter where you start. What matters is that you start, that you take the first step toward claiming your throne, that you exercise your sovereignty by making one conscious choice aligned with your highest good. And then tomorrow, you make another conscious choice, and the day after that, another, and slowly, steadily, inevitably, you'll find yourself becoming someone different, someone stronger, someone freer, someone more capable of creating the life you truly want. Remember the young man who studied while others wasted their evenings. Remember the friend who protected his attention while others scattered theirs. These weren't extraordinary people with special advantages. They were ordinary people who made extraordinary choices, who claimed their kingship and refused to abdicate it. You can be that person. You can write your own story of transformation through self-control, starting right now. The power is within you. It's always been within you, waiting for you to recognize it and use it. Your kingdom awaits its rightful ruler, and that ruler is you. If you've found value in this exploration of the kingship of self-control, if something has resonated with you, if you feel inspired to begin or continue your own journey towards self-mastery, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to Audiobook Library. Your support helps this channel grow and allows us to continue bringing you transformative wisdom from the world's greatest books. Every like, every subscription, every share helps us reach more people who are searching for the keys to unlock their potential, just as you are. Together, we're building a community of people committed to growth, to learning, to becoming the best versions of ourselves. So please, take just a moment to click that like button and subscribe. It truly does make a difference, and it helps ensure that more content like this continues to reach those who need it. The journey of self-mastery is not one you have to walk alone. In fact, it's much easier and more enjoyable when you're surrounded by others who share your commitment to growth. By being part of this community, by engaging with this content, by subscribing and returning for more, you're creating accountability and support for yourself. You're reminding yourself regularly of these principles through continued learning. You're staying connected to the inspiration that fuels real change. This is how transformation happens, not through one moment of insight, but through consistent return to empowering ideas, through regular reinforcement of positive principles, through ongoing education that keeps you focused on what matters most. As you move forward from this moment, carry with you the central message of Jordan's wisdom, that self-control is not a burden to be endured, but a gift to be embraced. Not a restriction of your life, but an expansion of it. Not a denial of who you are, but the fullest expression of who you're capable of becoming. You are meant to be the king or queen of your own existence, ruling with wisdom, acting with intention, living with purpose, choosing with consciousness. This is your birthright, your potential, your calling. The throne of self-mastery awaits, and with each conscious choice, each moment of discipline, each exercise of control over your thoughts, emotions, words, and actions, you ascend that throne more fully. The world needs people who have claimed their kingship, who have mastered themselves, who live with integrity and purpose and wisdom, who model what's possible for human beings when we refuse to be controlled by our lower impulses and instead align ourselves with our higher nature. Be that person. Start today, start now, and watch as your entire life transforms from the inside out. The power is yours. The choice is yours. The throne is yours. All that remains is for you to claim it, and that begins with the very next choice you make. Make it a conscious one, make it a wise one, make it a choice worthy of a king or queen. Your kingdom awaits its ruler, and that ruler is you.